Hello, I'm Night Novel, your humble storyteller for this evening. Welcome back to 𝐏𝐚𝐥𝐞 𝐂𝐚𝐜𝐡𝐞𝐱𝐢𝐚. It's episode 2, and in the previous one we got introduced to Seina, we got introduced to Esther, we entered a spooky manor, and well, it turns out that Seina is pretty awesome. And we're gonna stick around for a while, so welcome back. I'm so glad you decided to give my series a chance. Let's continue. Well, if you need me for anything, my room is upstairs, right next to Papa's office. I'm quite tired too, so I think I'll head off to sleep. With a lengthy yawn, Seina stretched her arms over her head, then hopped up to her feet. The darkness clouding her features earlier had all but vanished, and now she beamed as radiantly as the sun. Good night, Esther. I hope you have wonderful dreams. Good night, Seina. Thank you, really. She gave Esther a long, heartfelt smile, one that seemed wise and peaceful beyond her years somehow. After that last look, Seina finally turned away, her light footfalls pattering towards the stairs. Esther watched her go, listening in something of a daze, until she heard the bedroom door softly click shut. What a day, huh? The past hour almost felt like a dream itself, and Esther half expected to awaken by a shoddy campfire at any moment. Her hopes for finding a cure had been dashed, rekindled, dashed, and rekindled once more. And now, she was reluctant to let her expectations run too high. She could stay here for a little while, going through the apothecary's research in search of any clues. But there was no guarantee she'd find anything of use. Still, it was the only thing she had to go on. And if there was a chance she wouldn't return home empty-handed, then it was worth giving it a try. And Seina... What a strange, remarkable girl. Even though she sounds like she smokes 50 packs of cigarettes a day. She'd survived out here alone for 6 years, suffered the death of her father, yet somehow still remained as buoyant as a feather. Esther found it hard not to be deeply curious about her, and envious of all her whirlwind energy and excitement. It reminded her of a time not so long ago, back when she used to be like Seina. With a quiet sigh, Esther reached down into her satchel. Before she slept, there was one thing she had to do, just like every night. Slowly, Esther pulled out a fine silver pocket watch, its thin hands marking the time. But when she pressed one of its buttons, the back abruptly popped open, revealing a tiny, glistening syringe. With a practiced motion, she jabbed the needle straight into her arm. It stung even more than usual. As the seconds passed, Esther watched her blood slowly filter up through the syringe into the watch's mechanisms. Then, after a long few moments, the flow stopped, and the blood reversed its course, oozing downward back into her body. As it returned beneath Esther's flesh, a dark circle slowly spread around the pierced spot. She kept her focus on the watch's face. 2, 5, 8. The hour hands started swiveling forward. 10, 14, 18, 24. Click. The last drops pushed into her vein. Wincing, Esther pulled the needle free, closing the watch with a hasty squeeze of her palm. This medicine of hers, a marvel of technology, they called it. But Esther hated the needle far more than drinking the normal tonic. If only it was easier to bring the ingredients with her everywhere. Right now, she didn't have much choice beyond the watch, which injected a potent version of the remedy into her veins once a day. And yet, despite her reliance on the watch, or maybe because of it, Esther longed to be able to cast a twisted thing into a fire like the one before her now. Dropping the watch back into her satchel, she curled up tightly beneath her blankets. The parlor felt colder and less cozy now that she was alone again. But as she closed her eyes, all of Esther's exhaustion caught up with her at once, weighing down on her body like a heavy sheet. Get some rest, girl. Before long, the crackle of the fireplace lulled her to sleep, sheltered from the cold night outside. And all her restless thoughts gave way to a deep darkness. Okay. Another day of rain. Not a strong storm, but a steady one, quietly smothering the house in a downpour that had seemingly lasted for weeks. Oh. Enter a third character. Dark, heavy drops sluggishly coursed down the window pane, forming jagged patterns that soon dissolved into nothingness. His gaze followed the rambling paths, watching them aimlessly and without pleasure. But there was nothing else to look at. No impulse to pull him out of this empty staring and into something, anything that would serve more of a purpose. How long had he been standing here? Bizarrely, he couldn't remember. Had it been minutes? Hours? Was it morning? Evening? How was it possible to tell when the clouds blurred all sense of light and time? It was only her occasional visits that separated the days for him. That soft, timid, infuriatingly insistent knocking. A reminder that she'd left a tray of food outside his locked bedroom door. Okay, so I'm going to take a guess and say that this is the apothecary, and this is a flashback, and he's talking about Seina. Always followed by an uncertain voice calling out for him, then a long pause, before finally her soft footsteps padded away down the stairs. What sort of a voice do we give this man? Little wretch, he whispered flatly to his reflection, which only stared back at him with gray irises. He'd hold himself in here to be away from both them and her, away from her constant smiling, her laughter, that boundless energy that seemed to be mocking him for his pathetic state. A twisted, ungrateful creature. I should have believed his instincts about her from the very beginning. What are you on about? With an immense, painful effort, he pulled himself away from the window. Leaning on his splintered cane, the man staggered towards the bed, where he collapsed onto the sheets like a puppet with severed strings. This is the study, isn't it? As he curled into a fetal huddle and hugged his arms around his body, he ran his fingers across the sickly protrusion of ribs pressing against his skin, sharp bones contained by only a thin layer of flesh. If he held himself like this, You could feel the hard, slow, arrhythmic beating of his heart. The tightness in his chest made it difficult to breathe deeply, and so his inhales were shallow and jagged. Was it anxiety, his health, or worrying about his health that made his ribcage feel like it was always being crushed? He rolled over onto his right side, closing his eyes, trying desperately to ignore the uneven pounding in his chest. Trying to breathe deeply, to calm himself down, and reassure himself that he still deserved to live. No way. No way are we getting a freaking intro cinematic. I am so ready for this adventure. Now do note that this is a kinetic novel, meaning there's not going to be many choices, or any choices. But still, there's a story here to tell. Cool characters, beautiful art, and mysteries to solve. The music. I'm ready for this journey. I hope you are too. However it may end. Oh, it's morning. A lovely smell, like herbs and flowers, sweet, delicate, and earthy. As Esther slowly forced her eyelids open, that pleasant scent greeted her with the morning sun. She blinked around in confusion. This unfamiliar place. Was she dreaming? What kind of place had she awoken in? But as her mind dispelled its haze of sleep, the previous night's events came drifting back to her. The forest, the manor, Seina. All of it was real. Esther dragged herself up into a sitting position, rubbing at her eyes with one hand. Then, her gaze drifted down to the floor, where a small mug sat by her feet. Well, that just seems precarious. I could have easily knocked that over. Seina, what are you thinking? Curious, she bent down to pick it up and realized she'd been smelling the fragrant tea inside. After one sip of the warm drink, she felt instantly refreshed. It was like filling her lungs with cool, crisp morning air, a restorative that washed through and cleansed her system. Who could this be? I'm just gonna say it's Seina. Is it really all right to ask her that? I don't want to push her. She just looks so tired. I don't know. A soft muttering caught Esther's attention. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw Seina sweeping the floor with a thoughtful expression, lost in whatever she was lost in whatever she was contemplating. If only you didn't hate visitors, Papa. I really could have used your advice. Seina shook her head, sighing wistfully. Oh, you're awake. Suddenly noticing Esther's gaze, she let out a soft gasp and hurried over to the couch, her features quickly brightening into a smile. I just want to point out some technical things that I really enjoy about this. It seems like we have very few backgrounds, but they use them in such an interesting way where it's always zoomed in, which the art style, helps with since it's just a little smudgy, so it doesn't really matter if we're a little zoomed in or not. And we keep moving back and forth with different ways of showing the characters on screen or showing the text, and it just helps keep it fresh. Really digging it so far. Suddenly noticing Esther's gaze, she let out a soft gasp and hurried over to the couch, her features quickly brightening into a smile. With both her hands, Seina clutched a broom that had to be twice her size, although she didn't look encumbered by it at all. "Hello, Seina. Thank you for the tea."
Oh, it's nothing. I hope it hasn't gotten too cold. I can make a fresh pot if you'd like.
It's fine. You don't have to do that.
You don't like other people doing things for you, do you, Esther? I'm sorry. I'll try to be better about it.
Esther averted her gaze, somewhat embarrassed by Seina's keen observation and apology. "Have you been cleaning since you got up? I didn't hear you at all." Clearing her throat, she swiftly changed the subject.
Yes, I have. There's a lot to clean in this big, lovely house, so I need to do a little every morning and every evening.
You must clean really well. It's like there's a maid living here.
Oh, really?
A happy flush rose to Seina's cheeks as she bounced on her toes a little. Sometimes I feel like I should have given her even more of a girly girl voice and not like she's a smoker, but I plan to be doing this channel for a long time, so we have time to develop voices, but I don't know if my voice can do cute little girls.
Well, it's not a chore or anything. I love cleaning, actually. Papa worked really hard to repair the house and make it pretty. It was a lot easier to clean when he was here, though. Some of the rooms are a little run down, and I don't use them, so I don't dust those as much. But I try my best to take care of the others, even if it's not perfect.
Her smile wilted slightly, as if she were disappointed in herself for not keeping the entire house pristine. It's still amazing. Even if I loved cleaning, I couldn't care for this whole place alone.
Of course you could, Esther.
Seina responded without missing a beat, giving a determined nod and tapping her broom on the floor.
Anyone can do anything. Anything they really want to do, that is. They just have to figure out what way is best for them.
The other girl's confidence caught Esther off guard. She didn't seem to have a single cynical bone in her whole body.
But anyway, I do hope you slept well. I'm sure you must have been very tired. I could see it in your eyes. They were so shadowed.
A hint of concern crept into Seina's voice as she studied Esther's face closely.
You do look a little better today, though. Not as gloomy. After you finish your tea, shall we go take care of the grounds together? If you're feeling up to it, I mean.
I am, yes. And it's the least I could do to repay you.
Esther.
Seina seemed like she was about to remind her that there was no need to repay anything, and Esther was taking this all far too seriously. Esther was quite used to hearing that response, despite the fact that nobody ever seemed to really mean it.
Whatever makes you the most happy. That's what a good hostess would say, I think. Just don't overwork yourself, all right? I feel like you're stubborn enough to keep going until you faint.
All right. After beaming at Esther encouragingly, Seina hoisted her broom up and cleared her throat.
All right, I'll go finish sweeping the kitchen while you drink your tea, then we'll go out. Oh, it's such a lovely day. I can't wait to show you around. Oh, I'm so excited.
With a delighted sigh, she rushed over towards the kitchen, her broom swirling across the floor in a flurry of motion. What a peculiar girl she was. Maybe it was to be expected, considering she'd lived all alone for so long. Nobody was forcing her to try and fit in with normal society. For that reason, Esther couldn't really get a grasp on her behavior or her personality, and that made her all the more curious about the story behind Seina's unusual situation. We'll probably get to the bottom of it in time. After she finished her tea, Esther made her way to the manor's entrance. Seina, who was already eagerly waiting for her, led the way out into the fresh morning air. Let's see if the manor's more welcoming in the daylight. So far it's still pretty creepy. As Esther's gaze drifted up to the radiant blue sky, it almost felt like she'd been transported to a different forest. The dark, oppressive atmosphere of the previous night had vanished, transforming once more into a fairy tale shimmer. And with Seina's company, the woods didn't seem quite so vast and daunting, or as lonely for that matter.
All right, we're off to the well first.
Reaching down beside the front door, Seina picked up 2 buckets from beneath a protective cloth. Although both were decently sized, one was smaller and looked less professionally made, as if an amateur had crafted it. After a brief pause, Seina held a larger bucket out to Esther. In that moment of hesitation, her gaze misted over with a distant look.
Shall we?
She reached out to take Esther's free hand with her own, holding it gently. It seemed like a subconscious movement, as if Seina hadn't even realized she'd done it. The sudden warmth of those lightly calloused fingers caught Esther off guard. Normally, she always disliked being touched, but curiously enough, Seina's delicate grasp didn't give her the same sense of discomfort.
Yes, let's go.
Seina gave her a soft, contented smile, although it seemed more melancholy than usual. An unexpected sadness briefly tugged at Esther's chest, and she had the odd sense she'd glimpsed something she shouldn't have. This must be so good for Seina, though. Hand in hand, they wandered across the manor grounds, heading for the well out by the garden. Neither of them spoke. Only the sound of birdsong and their light footsteps in the leaves filled the air. It seemed strange for Seina to be so quiet, but Esther was a little relieved too. She didn't feel any pressure to speak. Briefly, she wondered if Seina had completely lost herself in thought, perhaps even forgetting Esther's presence. But, as if she could somehow read Esther's mind, Seina glanced over towards her. The smile on her face had grown contented once more, most traces of sadness drying up beneath the warm sunlight. Show me the smile. As they stepped up to the well, Seina came to a halt.
I'll let you go first, if you like.
She turned to look at Esther expectantly, tilting her head to one side. Nodding, Esther turned towards the well, scanning over it hastily. It had to be quite simple, surely. All she needed was to tie the rope to the bucket. That was it, right? Surely she could just lower it down afterwards. She wasn't very good at tying knots, though. What if it couldn't hold the water's weight and she'd lost Seina's bucket down the well? Esther realized that the other girl was watching her closely, eyes widening in realization.
Have you ever drawn water from a well, Esther?
Stricken with a sudden sense of self-consciousness, Esther shook her head. It seemed like such a basic thing to do, and yet she'd never really had the chance.
Really? But how do you get water?
We have a water pump. The servants are normally the ones who use it. As Esther spoke, she started feeling more and more sheepish. Talking about servants made her sound so privileged and haughty. She hoped Seina wouldn't think less of her for it.
So the water comes right to you, and you have servants fetch it, so you don't even have to do any work. That sounds amazing. You must be something like a princess or a noble.
She studied Seina for a moment, trying to tell if she was being teased. But the other girl just peered up at her with wonder and curiosity, her gaze sparkling excitedly.
I'm not a princess.
A lot of people in my city have servants. We only keep a few, but some families have dozens.
Dozens?
As if trying to imagine such a thing, Seina closed her eyes, letting out an envious sigh.
There must be so much more to this city than what Papa told me. It's like another world or something, isn't it?
For some reason, that thought made Esther feel a little crestfallen.
Well, even if you were a princess, I don't think it would matter.
Her focus returning to Esther, Seina put on a bright, confident smile, like she'd suddenly come to a realization about something.
As long as I know where you come from, and you know where I come from, we should be able to understand each other easily, right? And it makes me really happy to hear about your home, even if I know I'll never fit in there.
There are so many, anime reaction sounds here that I have to somehow figure out the mood of. But it's fun, but there's a lot of dots in this story. The warmth of Seina's smile was contagious. Even if she doubted the other girl's words, they put Esther slightly more at ease. Seina didn't seem like she'd ever judge her for not knowing something. I don't think you'd like the city, since it's not a very nice place, but it's all I've ever known.
Oh, I'm sure it can't be that bad. Both you and Papa come from cities after all, so there have to be some good people there.
She punctuated her words with a confident nod, unfazed by Esther's hesitance.
Anyway, shall we fetch some water? I'll go first so I can show you the best way to tie the knot. Here, just like this.
Esther watched as Seina secured the rope to her bucket, lowering it down with a winch until it splashed into the water. Afterwards, when she mimicked Seina's knot with her own, larger bucket, Esther felt a wave of relief when it managed to make the return journey. Her smaller companion seemed thrilled too, even if it was an unremarkable feat. Perhaps she was just excited to impart her knowledge. That's nice. Buckets in hand, they set off towards the gardens, water cheerfully splashing with each step. This is making me feel really, really good. I needed these vibes tonight. Despite Seina's small frame, she carried her full bucket with little effort. Years of solitary labor must have given her strength that belied her size. Esther felt her arms already getting slightly sore from the heavy weight, but she made a determined effort not to show any trace of discomfort in front of Seina.
Here we are, Esther. My garden. What do you think?
As they came to a stop among the rows of neatly planted crops, Seina swiveled around to look up at Esther eagerly. I can't believe you do all of this alone. It's so pretty and well kept.
You really think so?
Esther nodded, her gaze drifting across the diverse, meticulously cared for vegetables and leafy greens with admiration.
Well, actually, Papa was the one who made the first garden patch here. He wanted to live off what he could grow and forage for himself because he hated relying on other people. I only saw him visit the city a few times a year. He taught me how to do everything by myself too. Well, not everything, but he did write an almanac and a foraging book, and he made them really easy to understand, just for me. So as long as the earth is still alive, I know I'll be all right.
You amazing girl. Humming contentedly to herself, Seina led the way over to a large watering can that sat near a row of peas. Once she'd emptied her bucket into the can, she traded the empty vessel with Esther, a convenient way to hold plucked weeds. Luckily for Esther, weeding wasn't a task that needed much instruction. They're working together under the warm sun. It didn't take long for them to settle into a comfortable pace together, with Seina watering and fuzzing over her crops while Esther pulled out unwanted sprouts. Although gardening had never really appealed to her before, it surprised Esther how relaxing it was to work with her hands like this. Working side by side helped diminish the awkwardness that still lingered between them as well, and before long, Esther felt comfortable enough to break the silence with a question. Do you ever get nervous when it grows colder? In case there isn't enough food to last you until spring, I mean.
Oh, no, not really. Some plants grow all the way through winter, and things like potatoes will last for a while in my pantry. You can dry out berries and mushrooms, and nuts are always good too. There are a lot growing around here, so I never run out of those.
Motioning towards some shrubs at the edge of the clearing, Seina hefted her watering can with a light grunt before she continued.
Actually, I think it's quite fun when a new season comes along. It means I can plant new foods and make new recipes. I'd really miss winter if it never came, even if the house does get icy cold.
Icy cold? Isn't it cozy by the fireplace, as long as you're covered in blankets?
It's a little bit drafty still. With some hot tea, it's perfect. Oh, that reminds me. I have to show you my winter recipe book sometime. I'm making a new spring one, since I've been trying a lot of different things, and there are really so many amazing combinations you can have with just...
With a small smile warming her face, Esther listened as Seina began recounting tales of her recent cooking and foraging adventures. It felt so calm and comfortable somehow. Perhaps Seina had noticed how little Esther liked to speak, so instead of asking too many questions, she lightly chattered away about lettuce and peas, her voice filling the silence like the bubbling of a stream. After they'd finished weeding and watering, they brought their empty pails and a few small trowels to venture outside the clearing. Eager to share her knowledge, Seina guided Esther to the best foraging spots she'd found, pointing out which berries, nuts, and wild greens were best to gather. The more that Esther learned, the less harsh and daunting the forest appeared. Surviving in the wild always struck her as a daunting task, but Seina's simple, cheerful explanation made it seem like something anyone could accomplish, as long as they put in enough effort. None of this seemed like work for Seina either. It was almost like they were just playing together instead. Esther couldn't help but envy her energy and enthusiasm, the way she managed to take so much joy from everything. And yet, at uncertain moments, there was something unusually determined and purposeful about her effervescent happiness, as if it were another method of survival, just like her gardening or foraging were. Ooh. If yesterday was all doom, gloom, and scary forest and manor, today has been sunshine and the beginnings of a good friendship. However, this is where we are going to close the page on this evening's story. But of course, there is still more left to tell, so stay safe, take care of yourself, and please, return here whenever you wish. This is Night Novel, signing off.